big deal in the
Hey guys, I don't know if you can hear me. It's your boy Talk Williams. Let me see if I can get my mic right. Yeah, the video was actually taken down for some reason. It was actually on TMZ site, but right here, let me see if I can even show the site. Maybe they just took it down, period. But I had it sitting there for a reason. Let me move my guy out the way. Yeah, I had it sitting there for a reason, but this was the news a few minutes ago on TMZ site. Here it is right here. TMZ have reported that the federal prosecutors in the Diddy case, they're dropping charges. They announced the dropping of several of the charges against Diddy. Let me see if I can get some sound going. And I was going to play the video. There was a video with Harvey on it. But that video's been taken down. Let me see if I can hear myself. Oh, yeah, there you go right there. So, there was a video up with Harvey on it. Let me see if he took it down and just made it available on the site. Because it was reported. Let's see if the video is available. Maybe he took the video down. Let me go in the site. Yeah, but he was talking about it. Harvey was talking about it. He was saying that the federal prosecutors are dropping the attempted kidnapping, the arson, and certain sex trafficking charges against Diddy. In fact, it goes to say that in a stunning, let me get this link up here. Hold up. Yeah, I guess he he took the video down. That's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, it makes sense though. It seemed like he should run it on his. Seemed like it would be more appropriate for him to run it on his podcast channel or something like that. It only makes sense. But there was some instruction. I'm gonna read the news article here, and let me see if I can get it out. I should have played the video, then I would have already had it, but it wouldn't really have mattered. I would have had to take it down anyway if he wanted it taken down. So that really didn't matter. But let's see what it says. Okay, here it is right here. Let me see if I can pull this down some more. No, I can't get it no more. All right. So that's it right there. But anyway, Diddy prosecutors dropping attempted kidnapping, arson, and certain sex trafficking charges. So as y'all know, it's piled up on Diddy. They've had too much baby oil, too many witnesses, too many videos, too many. And I think it's so much that it looks like a stretch. That's what I think may possibly be going on. But it says right here, as reported on TMZ, in a stunning move the day before closing arguments, and this would be the feds, okay? In a stunning move the day before closing arguments in the Diddy federal criminal trial in New York City, prosecutors have pulled back on some key testimony during the trial, specifically attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. And like I said, as reported on TMZ, they're actually saying that the prosecutors are dropping those charges. That's what's being reported. Now, it goes further to say that prosecutors said in a letter to Judge Arun, I can't pronounce the name, the government is following his honest instructions to streamline jury instructions. Okay? So the woman that you see in the picture right there, that was Diddy's former assistant 100 years ago, 10 years ago, however long ago, and that is Capricorn Clark. Remember Capricorn Clark, she was the one that came in there and testified to basically being kidnapped for 3 days in one place and being held hostage somewhere else for a week and being told that they would make her disappear into the New York River or some lake or wherever if she didn't cooperate, okay? In fact, it goes right here to say the reality is prosecutors seem to feel that they've fallen flat on proving Diddy's allegedly kidnapped former employee, Capricorn Clark, who was taken into a building and given a lie detector test to determine if she stole Diddy's jewelry, and Cassie when she was allegedly held at the London hotel. So there go two situations right there where even the federal prosecutors are basically like, this sounds crazy. It doesn't even look like he kidnapped Cassie. It doesn't look like he kidnapped Capricorn Clark. So we're just going to get rid of this whole this whole kidnapping thing, which to me, it already did its damage. Okay, because you can't erase the thought of it from people's minds. You can't do that. But to be perfectly honest, I come from the hood, and where I come from, they don't call it kidnapping. You just call it grab that crackhead and don't let them go until they talk. That's what they call it, right? But anyway, let's go to the next thing right here. It says that and to Jalen. Yeah, Jalen, that's a good point. To Jalen's point, Diddy's team had smoked both of them out anyway. I mean, that's the thing about this, right? You know, they caught in all types of lies. They just did, right? So that's that. But it goes to say, more surprising, prosecutors are not even pursuing the attempted arson that Diddy's supposed to did with Kid Cudi's car. So think about that. That whole charade about Kid Cudi, he did it, Cassie saying he did it, people calling saying he's on his way and all of that, they're dropping that. They're not even pursuing that, okay? So again, it says prosecutors are not pursuing the attempted arson claim that Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car in a jealous rage. During the trial, prosecutors never directly linked Diddy to the fire. They never did. Both of these charges related to the racketeering charge that Diddy faced. So that's part of the racketeering, all right? As for the aiding and abetting sex trafficking charge, prosecutors don't explain what elements of sex trafficking they will, 86 from the jury instruction, 86 meaning kill, meaning to dead, right? They're going to remove some of that. Prosecutors do say in their letter to the judge that they want an instruction that just because women, Cassie and Jane, gave prior consent to sexual acts, it doesn't mean that it could never be withdrawn. So now it's almost like the prosecutor is conceding to a lot of the common sense things, we know how this goes things of everyday people or potentially the jury, because a lot of it is just too far. It was stretched out. It was obnoxious. You can't be so crafty as a crackhead, so crafty as a hooker, so crafty enough that you having sex on the guy that you left Diddy. You left Diddy to be with a guy, and even when you was with the guy after calling yourself leaving Diddy, you was still freaking off with other men that didn't even have anything to do with Diddy. So somebody of that mindset, and I get it, she's such the victim. Cool. But there's some small percentage in there that says pick a side. You're going to be dumb or stupid. Which one you going to, you're smart or dumb? What are we doing? It's even the prosecutors see that. So now they want some of the jury instructions to be, hey, even when she's sitting on top of them, humping them, bouncing up and down, she can say no in between a hump, even while she in motion. Right, we get it. We get it. It goes to say that prosecutors also says that jurors should be told that just because a woman received compensation does not preclude a finding of forced labor, which relates to sex trafficking. So okay, So let me ask the question then. Where can you work at that you're being paid at a job that you voluntarily come in that office, report to that residence, you don't live there, nobody's keeping you there, you kiss somebody goodbye that morning on your way there, and you leave and go home every night, and you're getting paid, and where can you file a claim for forced labor? Right. But they want the judge to instruct the jury that just because you're being paid to perform a service and you're consenting to the service and you're doing it voluntarily and you're doing it over a matter of years, that doesn't mean that wasn't forced labor. All right, cool. And as for the sex trafficking, which I thought was interesting myself, prosecutors want juries to know that neither physical restraint of the alleged victim nor commercial sex acts are required to prove coercion in sex trafficking. It's all amazing. Yeah, I think he removed it. It's removed. I don't see it. Because on the one before that was up there, it had a read more version, and there was a video. Harvey has taken down the video. The video has been removed. In fact, if you slide out to the to the beginning of it, like I said, but he can do that. He needs to doctor it up and do what he needs to do, and Harvey will bring it back to us, I'm sure, in the way that nobody but Harvey can do. Let me click on this. Yeah, so that's a plus for Diddy. That's a plus for Diddy. That's what that is. I mean, let me see if it's back here. There it is right there. An error. Please retry again. Yeah, they took it down. I'm excited to see the video now, the explanation. But hopefully other media outlets, which I was doing a search, and I can't seem to find any. Let me see. Feds drop charges against Diddy in Diddy trial. I don't see anybody else saying that. 4 hours ago. Oh, it is. Hold up. Oh, it is. It is another outlet. Tisa Tills. Yeah, there are other outlets. Okay. Because I was like, that's crazy. Let me see. I don't want to use hers, though. Got Seti Nash. Oh, okay. So this is old news. I thought it was something new, but let me see this one. Who is this? Oh, Eyewitness News. I'll play the Eyewitness News one. No, the reason why I'm really choosy about which ones I do, Jalen, what's up? Jalen says this jewelry is not sequestered. They going home hearing everything. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, so they getting parallel hearings. They get the hearing in court, and then they get the public hearing. Let me play the one from Eyewitness News then. The reason why I have to be choosy about which ones I play, because I don't want to get I only do the ones where they allow you to share it out. Like I said, the one from TMZ, Harvey had a whole video on it, but he'll bring it back out, I'm sure, because he's going to share that with us. He probably had to add something or do a little clip or something like that to make it make sense better. But let's see what ABC News says in a quick 2 minutes about this.
News in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial.
The federal prosecutors are no longer including attempted kidnapping and attempted arson. They're underlying crimes in the alleged racketeering conspiracy charge.
Well, that's right, and this development comes with closing arguments set to begin later this week. ABC's Aaron Katersky joins us live outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, can you put this development into context for us? Is this in any way a blow to the prosecution?
Well, it could be, Tanya, but not necessarily. Up until now, federal prosecutors said that attempted arson of Kid Cudi's Porsche was one of the underlying crimes underpinning the racketeering conspiracy. We'll back up for a second. In order to find Sean Combs guilty of racketeering conspiracy, the jury must find that he conspired to commit some other offenses. And until today, prosecutors said one of those was attempted arson. They showed the jury pictures of Kid Cudi's torched out Porsche. And he even testified, saying that he saw the Molotov cocktail that was responsible, the charred interior, his blackened sports car. And the implication was that Sean Combs was behind it. But there was never direct evidence tying Combs to the arson. So prosecutors signaled in a letter to the judge that they would no longer proceed under the theory that Combs conspired to commit attempted arson. One of the other underlying crimes, the so-called predicate acts, involved attempted kidnapping of Capricorn Clark, a former assistant to Sean Combs. Prosecutors are no longer going to proceed under that theory either. Instead, they're emphasizing other crimes that they say Combs conspired to commit, like sex trafficking, like forced labor, and they're going to emphasize those things when they speak to the jury during summations starting on Thursday.
All right, Aaron Katursky, thank you so much.
But in a football game, or in any kind of sports ball game, 34-0 is a blowout. The zero side isn't just beaten, they're usually embarrassed. But lucky for Diddy, trials are not football games, and calling 0 defense witnesses to the prosecution's 34 witnesses and then promptly resting, that can mean one of two very different things. It might mean we got nothing, or it might mean you got nothing, meaning the feds, you got nothing. A lot of court watchers thought that Diddy himself might actually take the stand, believing that he could outperform the government's 34 witnesses and then some. But that did not happen. This did. Wow. You see it like that, you really do feel it, right? You feel all 7 weeks of trial. 34 witnesses in 7 weeks. Instead, we got the next best thing. 34 witnesses in 7 weeks. Instead, we got the next best thing. Court watchers thought that Diddy himself might actually take the stand, believing that he could outperform the government's 34 witnesses and then some. But that did not happen. This did. Wow. You see it like that, you really do feel it, right? You feel all 7 weeks of trial. 34 witnesses in 7 weeks. Instead, we got the next best thing in this sex trafficking racketeering trial. We got Diddy doing his damnedest to charm the pants off the judge in this courtroom today. A judge who spoke to Diddy first, asking him, how you feeling? And Puff Daddy, being Puff Daddy, answered, quote, I'm doing great, Your Honor. I've been wanting to tell you, thank you. You're doing an excellent job, end quote. To which the judge replied, thank you, I appreciate it. I don't often hear a defendant stand up and say that, but I don't often see a defendant like Diddy. For their part, his legal team moved immediately to throw the whole case out, claiming that the prosecutors over there did not come close to meeting their burden of proof for this trial. Newsflash, that is almost standard operating procedure after prosecutors rest their case. And if your lawyer doesn't throw that Hail Mary, time to get a new lawyer. For his part, the judge did not rule on Diddy's lawyer's request to toss it all out. But you just wait for it. It's coming. Yeah. Lawyers actually have to come back to the court tomorrow without the rest of us all there so that they can hammer out all the jury instructions. So, yeah, you're probably going to get that ruling tomorrow. And I'm going to bet my house, judge says, fat chance. Those are my words, but that's effectively what I think is going to happen. And speaking of the government's case, the feds rested with yet another mountain of receipts today, as well as text messages and video clips of and about the events they call Freakoffs. But the witnesses have called hotel nights, or sometimes king nights, or even wild king nights. And over the weekend, they released pages and pages of internal messages. I mean, this stuff was gold, Jerry. Diddy's staff members, furiously texting each other. what they needed to get to make things absolutely perfect for their boss, no matter how gross the requests. In one message, an assistant named Joey Chavez writes, and I quote, need more BO, that's baby oil, and AG, that's Astroglide, tomorrow before everybody leaves. And then another staffer named Frank Butler on the chat responds, just packed 30 bottles of baby oil. Joey, exactly how much do we need? And Joey's answer, as much as possible. I can't even imagine being on this text chain. And then that same Joey later on asks, what's our BO/AG count? That's, baby oil and Astroglide count. And then Frank replies, 30 plus on each. Then comes this message about Diddy's girlfriend, again from the name Frank Butler. Quote, we need to put Jane on payroll if she ain't already. And you know that Jane is, of course, that alleged victim, right? Ex-girlfriend of Diddy's, who testified at length under a pseudonym. Her real name in the original text, we redacted it out, right? It just says Jane. And some texts are super duper explicit. A Diddy assistant writes, okay, I need to refresh her bag of blanks. Oh my God, it's actually up there on the screen. Okay, so I can't say that, but I need to refresh her bag of blanks and send to her. The her in that message also appears to be Jane, and Frank Butler adds, need the sex luggages and light, which I think means lights because they talked a lot about having tons and tons of red lights in the hotel rooms for these freak-off king nights, wild king nights, whatever you call them. And then this one. I say this a lot, but I really mean it this time. Get a whiskey for this one, or make sure you just don't do a spit take, because this next one involves the excessive lube and baby oil that must have been going down in those hotel rooms, because this is a message post-Freakoff. KK, who you'll know by now is Diddy's ex-chief of staff, Christina Coram, texts this question: how's the cleanup going? To which Joey, the poor, long-suffering assistant, responds, slipped and fell twice. Ugh. I don't know if that's a joke or serious, because honestly, with 1,000 bottles of lube and baby oil, it could have been serious, could have been real. Later on, KK sends out a week-long operations plan to the team. Jane is scheduled for multiple, quote, wild king nights, while the team is instructed to be fully staffed and standing by, both for Diddy's meetup with Jane, but then also for the meetup with the next girlfriend, the rapper Young Miami. She's arriving immediately afterwards. Or maybe there's crossover. I don't know. It's Diddy. I'm going to rest my case right now. I'm going to bring in my guests, Maria Cruz Melendez. She's a former federal prosecutor who handled multiple organized crime cases, in particular the R. Kelly conviction, which, may I remind you, was sex trafficking and racketeering in the Southern District. And Sarah Azari is a criminal defense attorney and News Nation legal analyst, and also one of our favorites. Ladies, so good to have you both. I cannot wait for this conversation. Maria, Diddy's team bailed. They decided they were not going to mount a case. They were not going to, well, they put a few things on the record, but they weren't going to call a single witness. Do you believe, with all of your background and experience, that they really did think the government didn't meet its burden? Or do you believe that they couldn't find an unimpeachable witness to get up there and sing Diddy's praises without risk of the prosecution tearing them to ribbons?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, they're weighing whether or not they can make the arguments that they want to make on closing without giving access to the prosecution, to witnesses where they could make additional points. And so is it possible that they had a number of witnesses that could have provided helpful information? I think that's absolutely the case. But to use your word, would they have been unimpeachable? Probably not. I think they would have given access to the prosecution to make additional points. And you mentioned earlier the fact that the defense doesn't have a burden. They don't need to put a case on. And so I think at the end of the day, what they're going to end up relying on is the fact that they think the government hasn't met each and every one of the elements that they're supposed to meet.
So, Sarah, I know from watching so much of your coverage, you have not felt at any point in this trial, to my knowledge, that the prosecution has mounted a racketeering and sex trafficking case. I don't know if you feel the same way about transportation for the purpose of prostitution, but do you really believe that the prosecution hasn't met its burden?
Ashley, look, it takes one juror to agree with me, and he's not guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering. And I think that they're definitely overreaching on the racketeering. It's just putting Jane on, having 2 victims going missing. Remember that this jury, when they go to deliberate, they're not going to just be focused on what evidence was presented, but what evidence is missing. Where did those 2 other victims go? Where is Christina Coram, who's been referenced in text messages and is clearly a co-conspirator? So I don't think they have him on that. I do think that they've met their burden beyond a reasonable doubt on the prostitution. We've got male escorts being flown around for the purposes of sex across state lines, and I think that that's a clear thing. But, you know, if I was the defense, Ashley, I wouldn't be mad at that charge, right? Because that helps the jury get this really bad guy on something and don't let him walk out unscathed. So I kind of like the prostitution charge in the mix as a defense attorney. When I've got these kinds of facts, I don't think they've met their burden on the sex trafficking either. And remember, you know, we've got 2 different kinds of victims. We have a Jane victim and then we have a Cassie victim, and they're different dynamics, they're different relationships. One's vulnerable, one's actually, to me, an equal. Jane is. And I think this is going to be a hard, daunting task for this jury to think, were these women not just adults who were consenting to this freaky lifestyle, or was this really coercion?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because, Maria, I would love you to weigh in on this. All the way along, I have felt like Cassie was beaten into submission from the evidence that I saw. She just tried to go to a party once, and she was yanked out by her hair and beaten black and blue just for going to a party. God forbid she leave the man. So I feel as though the terror was real for Cassie, that she had to perform lest she deal with that, you know, on a regular basis. And when I say regular, many of the witnesses could not count how many times they saw her beaten and black and blue. But Jane was different. She had a $10,000 a month apartment that she didn't want to lose. Does that matter to these jurors, or could they just say, I see sex trafficking with Cassie, I don't see it with Jane, but that is still a predicate act for racketeering?
Well, I think at the end of the day, I agree with Sarah in that the Mann Act, the prostitution charges are likely to see a conviction with those. But Jane is different in terms of the relationship, and I think that's where the defense has poked the most holes in the government's case in their cross-examination of Jane. And so I do think there's a stark comparison between the 2 of them. And so the jury can decide at the end of the day. Count 2 is the sex trafficking with regard to Cassie Ventura, so they're going to find him guilty on that. I think it's likely they'll find guilty, as we mentioned, on the Mann Act stuff. The RICO is sort of a toss-up, because I do think it hinges on their ability to show that there was a co-conspirator. And I think the defense counsel has an opportunity to say here, we didn't see Christina Coram, if this is the co-defendant, or the co-conspirator. We didn't see Christina Coram testify here, and there's not enough evidence to show this. So I think we could see a split verdict. We could very much so see a situation where they look at Jane and they say, you were a consenting adult. There are lots of text messages that suggest that you either enjoyed it, or perhaps maybe it wasn't your cup of tea, but you did it because you were his girlfriend, and you did it because you wanted to please him and because you loved him, not because you were scared of the consequences of not doing it.
There is that financial fear, though, that he was dangling over her head in several messages saying, I can take that apartment away at any time. We both can stop what we do in this contract at any time. So I do wonder how the jurors will feel about that. But
that's a form of coercion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But the defense counsel...
Hold on, yeah. Start with what you were saying, Maria. You said that was a form of... Go ahead.
That is financial... constraints and coercion is one of the ways that they can prove their case, 100%. And if the jury is convinced of that, then the government can use that versus fear of physical attack. But during cross-examination, defense counsel was able to show that if Jane wanted to leave at any moment, she was financially secure and she could have supported herself and wasn't 100% dependent on Sean Combs. And so I do think there's room for reasonable doubt with respect to Jane and the sex trafficking.
Well, and
That's
she
what
had
I
a-
thought.
she had
That's
a
what I thought, Sarah. Because she was a model, right? She was an OnlyFans model making $10K before she met Diddy.
Right. I don't know how much money she was making as an OnlyFans model, but she had a 3-month security deposit on that $10,000 a month. Let me tell you, I'm from LA. That's a lot of rent in LA, okay? And that's, you know, she wanted providers. She liked men to pay for her. That's a choice, right? And as much as Diddy was holding up the rent card, I'm going to pull the rent if you don't do this and that, don't get on your job, you know, in one of the text messages, she was pulling the hotel night card, essentially saying, if you don't get back here from that vacation you're taking with this other woman that I'm jealous of, you're not going to get a hotel night. So there was very much, I did not see a power dynamic at play in this relationship. I very much saw her as somebody who stands her ground, is a first aggressor in an altercation that they had. She's the one that attacks him first. So she's not the same person to me. There's really a split screen between her and Cassie. With Cassie, we have, a control. She was younger. She was vulnerable. We have control of her career. We have control of her, like you said, her who she hangs out with, what she does, or, there was a lot more control there. And honestly, look, to Maria's point, they could find him not guilty as to Jane, sex trafficking Jane, but guilty as to Cassie. I mean, he's still doomed, so I think this would ultimately, if he's sentenced on sex trafficking, they would run concurrently. So at the end of the day, guilty on one is the same as guilty on two.
I hate putting people to the test with math on command, but Maria, I'm going to do it. If there's a guilty verdict for Cassie's sex trafficking, and they do see that it falls into the rubric of RICO, and of course the Mann Act, the transportation for the purposes of prostitution, which I agree, I think that one's dead to rights. What would he serve for that? What's the possibility there, Maria?
So the sex trafficking, the way they've charged it, carries a 15-year mandatory minimum. And with RICO, it can go up to 20 years. And as Sarah mentioned, there's a likelihood of that running concurrently. And so we could see as much as a 20-year sentence. But ultimately, it'll be up to the judge whether or not they think any mitigating factors exist. But if he's convicted on the sex trafficking, 15 years mandatory minimum.
Well, and I think, Ashley, look, the defense here,
55-year-old man, right?
Right. It's the rest of his life. But the defense here is consent, obviously. Money grab is the defense's star witness. And then don't forget the drugs. There was a lot of testimony elicited on cross-examination about whether or not he was under the influence when he did all these bad things, the blackmailing, the threats, the forced labor, and all these things. And so that matters, not just at sentencing as a mitigating factor, which is huge at federal sentencing, but also in closing arguments, that the man that you would think is guilty of these things is not that man. That man was a monster on drugs. I expect the defense to argue that heavily.
I have yet to see a DUI case where it was like, well, I was really drunk. I didn't mean to kill them.
No, it's not it's not a defense, but it's an explanation. Look, we got to explain it. We're defense lawyers.
You guys both have to come back because this has been one of the more insightful discussions that I have seen on this case, and I just can't stand when people throw their attitudes out there, but without backing it up. So thank you both, Maria.
And I really liked Maria. I thought she was a straight prosecutor. I appreciate.
Major developments today as we near the end of the blockbuster trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution rested its case after its 34th witness wrapped his testimony today. The summary witness was a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. Did he bring it home for prosecutors in their final attempt to prove the sex trafficking, racketeering, and prostitution charges against the music mogul? And the defense wrapped its case after a very brief presentation this afternoon without calling any witnesses, even the defendant himself. I'm criminal trial attorney Sarah Azari, and this is Serving Justice. Joining me now are Jesse Weber, News Nation legal contributor and Law and Crime Network host, Safiya Sami Ali, also an attorney, News Nation reporter who's been following this trial very closely, and of course, our favorite News Nation field producer, Tommy Cristaldi, who's been inside the courtroom throughout the trial. Everybody, welcome. We're in the last stretch of this trial and all the salaciousness around it. I'm really glad to be having this conversation with you guys. Jesse, I want to start with you. The prosecution wrapped its case today with a summary witness who went over texts and voicemails and invoices, a lot of stuff. I mean, there's been other summary witnesses in this case as well. It seemed like he's the witness who sets this chronology and essentially connects the dots for the prosecution. How successful was this guy in helping the prosecution prove its case, and as to which charge?
I think he was supremely successful in helping prove the transportation to engage in prostitution charges.
Okay.
You're trying to say that Sean Combs transported sex workers and these alleged victims for the purposes of sex work. Remember, for those charges, you don't need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. It's more of a straightforward charge. You got the travel receipts, you got the cash payments, you got the messages. I mean, a lot of the messages were Sean Combs' a central focus of coordinating all of this. There was even a message where he was speaking with Cowboys and Angels, that escort service. So it was supremely difficult for the defense to try to isolate him or say he didn't know what was going on. He didn't really know who was being paid for what or who was being transported. And I think even where the defense was trying to say under cross-examination, he was paying for certain things from his personal account and not necessarily the business account. Sure, right? That might help with a racketeering charge. That might help disprove racketeering. He wasn't getting all of his staff involved. He wasn't using his business resources. But at the end of the day, if he's paying for it or organizing it or coordinating it, that's where I think it becomes really, really difficult for the defense to argue away against this. I think a lot of it, these...
Well, you mean for the prostitution, right?
For the prostitution, which, by the way, let's not forget, that's up to 10 years in prison. It's a federal charge. He's facing 2 of them. So
he's never going to get 10 years.
You don't think so?
No, I think, look, I don't know how this judge is looking at this case. I know initially, early on, he made a comment off the record, not in front of the jury, that he felt like this case was based on gossip or something, or rumor. And I don't know how he feels. If he feels like the government really overreached and wasted tax dollars, he's ultimately the sentencer here. And but I don't think under any circumstance he's getting the max. But I think that's where his fairness will kick in. How serious does he think this conduct was, and how much has the prosecution abused their power in prosecuting Diddy? But I think also you have to understand that there's mitigating factors here, that the idea that he was using drugs, abusing drugs, and there's been a lot of testimony about, was he under the influence when he did this? Was he under the influence when he did that? I think that's not only going to be argued in closing argument to show that the Sean Diddy that you would be convicting is not this guy, is not the real guy, it's the guy that was under the influence of drugs, right? But it's also going to matter at sentencing for mitigating factors. I definitely, let me just say this. I am reading the tea leaves already, okay?
Shocker.
Okay. So I believe this is going to be a hung jury on sex trafficking, a guilty on prostitution, and a not guilty on racketeering. That's my personal belief today. Could change tomorrow. Okay. And so I just think if he's going to go down on prostitution, there's no way he's going to get more than like 3 or 4 years max. Anyway, Sophia, the defense presented its case without calling any witnesses. We know that the burden's entirely on them, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, all of that. And the jury gets the instructions for that as well. But looking back at these 7 weeks of testimony, how do you think this played out before the jury, that the defense essentially did nothing, pretty much?
Yeah, like you mentioned, they don't have to. The defense doesn't have any obligation to call anybody. But as a juror, this could go a couple of different ways, depending on the juror. It could go where they feel that the defense did their job with cross-examination and evidence, and they buttoned it up and they're like, mic drop, we're done. We don't need anything more. And that it kind of shows that the prosecution didn't meet its burden, so they don't feel like they need to put anything back. And it's kind of a slam dunk for the defense. But there's going to be jurors who are going to wonder and be curious why the defense didn't call anybody. Was there nobody they could have called? Was there not a former employee? Was there no one that could have spoken up for this person? And that might raise doubt in their mind, and they could be thinking the defense could have done more. Why didn't they do more? And that could kind of turn the wheels in a different way. So that's why it's really important that the judge makes it clear to these jurors that the burden is not on them, it's on the prosecution. And that
right. But to your point, look, the idea that the evidence presented is one thing and evidence not presented also matters. What's missing is also evidence, right? And so these jurors are going to go back and deliberate, and they're going to be like, where are the other two victims? What happened to these two?
That's true.
They're in the indictment. And where's that Christina Quorum that we've been hearing about, all the text messages, all the testimony about her? I think these jurors are going to have a lot of questions. And I think it's clear. And as I'm thinking back on this trial, I realize this prosecution has taken a lot of turns. I think they planned to have a certain case that they were going to put on, and this turned out to be a little bit different than their plan. And the jury's going to notice that. The jury's going to notice everything that's missing. The one thing that I thought was surprising, I thought they would at least put on their own expert, their own psychological expert. But again, I don't know what the value of that is when you're dealing with, it's clear. They're saying consent, prosecution saying coercion. And that abuse victim, who's a blind victim, what we call a blind victim because they haven't examined the parties, they're just essentially testifying to theory. I'm not sure how much more they could add for the defense, right, Jesse?
I don't think they have to. They have done a phenomenal job. A phenomenal job cross-examining the key witnesses, whether it's Cassie, Jane, Mia, Brianna Bungolan. Look, with Jane, you ask percentages, I think there's a 15 to 20% chance they convict them of sex trafficking. With Jane, not even because they even had to cross-examine her so much. Just look at the mountain of text messages. And look, that, to be very clear, you can have a victim who says yes 9 times out of 10. If she says
no one time,
that's it. There are messages that she said she was reluctant because she wasn't feeling well. She was exhausted. She felt she was being used. The jury could say she was being forced into this. However, there was a mountain of evidence, a mountain of messages where she's setting up these events. She's encouraging them. She's expressing her love. It's not the standard sex trafficking victim, as I think a lot of people believe. So the question becomes, why didn't they put on a case? Why didn't they call an expert? They don't need to call an expert. Testimony.
And they did do a phenomenal job. There is a lot of doubt, almost as to every witness, the assistants, the accusers, Mia, Jane. It's just a question of how much weight is given to that. How much of that benefit does Diddy get, given that he's such an unlikable person who did commit crimes? It's just not the crimes before the jury now, right? And so it all goes into we'd like to put him away for something. And that, to me, if I was on the defense team, I'd be like, I wouldn't be mad at that prostitution charge, right? Because at least the jury has something to get my client on, out of these 3 charges. So I'm not really mad at that charge. And to your point, Jesse, I think it's really important. I think we talked about this before, to remember that he's just as screwed if he's found guilty as to one accuser and not as to the others. They don't have to find him. They can say, Jane, forget it. She's a money grabber. Money grab seems to be the star witness for the defense in this trial. And they could say, but Cassie was a victim of sex trafficking, and he's just as screwed, right?
100%. It's minimum 15 years in prison.
Yeah. And Tommy, when the judge, this was really, I was like, what? Okay. The judge asked Combs about his attorney's decision, or whether it was really his decision, the attorneys communicated, not to have him take the stand. And he said, yes, it was my decision. But then he goes further and says, you're doing an excellent job. I mean, overstepping much?
Well, he said, by the way, Judge, I've been waiting for the opportunity to tell you this. I think you're doing a great job. Thank you so much. I was surprised by that. Certainly. I, again, haven't done too many of these, so I don't know how standard that was, but the sense I got was that it was not standard at all. No. It was a bit strange that he said that. I think that there are maybe a couple of explanations that I've come up with for as to why he did. One, just as we're sitting here talking, maybe he knows that there's an impending sentencing and he wants to remind the judge he's a big fan. Maybe it's because, this is his way of reminding us he is in control of his legal team all throughout the trial. We've seen him passing the notes. We've seen him kind of running the show, it's felt like. And so even this was just another way to have his own voice be heard. But I was definitely...
That's him using his charm, for sure.
Well, sure.
He said this not in front of the jury.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
But, look, I think if he...
It's almost like it was a performance for him. Like, oh, you're doing a great job. Like, he's the critic here, you know, where he's like, oh,
he's
you
the
know
arbiter.
what? You've been doing an excellent job, as if the judge
making the band.
Yeah, like duh. No, I think duh. No, I think if he said something like, Your Honor, I just wanted to thank you for, you know, what, but then also said, I apologize for my behavior early on, and nodding or something like that. You know, I think it would be more genuine. This to me sounded like it's Diddy using his charm or trying to use his charm.
Yeah, I thought there was an interesting moment where later on in that conversation, the judge asked him, you know, this is solely your decision. And he said, absolutely. And then he kind of paused and said, well, I mean, I talked it over with my team, of course. We talked about it. And then the judge had to have him clarify, but you're choosing this. And he said, yes, of course. I just thought it was a lot more words out of his mouth than I was expecting, frankly. I thought he'd be mostly quiet. I mean, we've seen him talk a handful of times throughout the trial, and it's typically just nodding and yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor. So this was unexpected for sure.
No, it's definitely unusual. And the only time really you hear a defendant say anything, if that, is a remorse statement in sentencing, if he's convicted and sentenced. But during the trial and during the course of these sort of out of the jury conversations on the record, anyway, Jesse.
Well, do you think, by the way, real quick, do you think there's a pattern here? I mean, when was the last time that he did something like this, when he was allegedly nodding at the jurors after a very effective cross-examination of a key witness? I think he might be feeling really good going into closing arguments, and he has a sense of confidence and is, you know, just speaking his mind to the court. I think,
Jesse, to your point, the defense he should be really happy. You know, the money, all the money that he spent on this, you know, absolutely dream team, you know, money well spent. They're really great. They're all great at what they do, and they did a phenomenal job. I mean, their job was to cast out. They were so strategic in the way that they selected each lawyer for specific witnesses. You know, I thought that was so brilliant, the way that they farmed out the work, you know, the trial to different people on the team. But do you think, Jesse, that the defense should have presented more of a case? No, right?
Would it have hurt them to call, I think, the head of HR that they wanted to call?
Yeah.
Probably to strike at the idea of forced labor? Maybe, but remember what their arguments were today when they were in that Rule 29 motion. They basically said, even if you take everything as true, these were willing, able U.S. citizens who could leave, and they did leave. And they may feel there is more harm in their witnesses providing testimony and being cross-examined by a very effective prosecution team than the benefit. And they probably feel at this point that there is enough that was raised and reasonable in their cross-examination and in all of the text messages. They don't have.
With you now with some breaking celebrity dish news. Prosecutors have dropped some charges against Diddy. Joining us now is TMZ executive producer Harvey Levin with the latest late breaking details. I mean, Harvey, I can't get through your story here fast enough. What's the latest?
Okay, it's a little bit confusing, Marissa, but let me explain. The prosecution sent a letter to the judge saying they want to, the judge had asked prosecutors and defense to streamline the proposed jury instructions. The prosecution is saying, okay, so let's eliminate attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. So now the question, what does that mean? We know the arson relates to Diddy allegedly blowing up Kid Cudi's car in a fit of jealousy, the fact that Kid Cudi had dated Cassie. So it would seem that they're saying we're just not going to pursue that when it comes to giving the jury instructions, because the jury never directly tied Diddy to the actual arson of the car. Now, they do mention the word attempted, so I suppose you can make the argument that they're going to not say he attempted it, he actually did it. But that doesn't make sense, because all they said in the testimony was that they believe he did it. Mm-hmm. And it went on fire, so it was done. So it seems like they're eliminating that. And similarly, when it comes to kidnapping, you may remember that there was testimony by Capricorn Clark, Diddy's assistant, saying that Diddy suspected her of stealing jewelry. They took her, put her in a warehouse, and gave her lie detector tests, and putting her in that warehouse was kidnapping. It seems they're not going to pursue that. And there was a second one involving this alleged victim, Jane. So it seems they're taking certain things off the table, but I got to be honest with you, the letter's a little bit confusing, but it definitely seems the prosecution is pulling back on what they are going to argue to the jury in closing argument.
Absolutely. And when it comes to the aiding and abetting with the sex trafficking, that charge is still there, but they're pulling back on even some of those details.
And my guess is what they're pulling back on are things like Diddy's assistant booking a hotel room. I mean, how is, that's booking a hotel room. Travago is not sex trafficking. and just booking a hotel room is not really evidence of sex trafficking. So I'm guessing it's things like that they might be pulling back on.
It definitely appears as if the prosecution have found some weak spots in their case, potentially, and that's why they're giving the jury those instructions, before making their...
News in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial.
The federal prosecutors are no longer including attempted kidnapping and attempted arson. They're underlying crimes in the alleged racketeering conspiracy charge.
Well, that's right, and this development comes with closing arguments set to begin later this week. ABC's Aaron Katersky joins us live outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, can you put this development into context for us? Is this in any way a blow to the prosecution?
Well, it could be, Tanya, but not necessarily. Up until now, federal prosecutors said that attempted arson of Kid Cudi's Porsche was one of the underlying crimes underpinning the racketeering conspiracy. We'll back up for a second. In order to find Sean Combs guilty of racketeering conspiracy, the jury must find that he conspired to commit some other offenses. And until today, prosecutors said one of those was attempted arson. They showed the jury pictures of Kid Cudi's torched out Porsche. And he even testified, saying that he saw the Molotov cocktail that was responsible, the charred interior, his blackened sports car. And the implication was that Sean Combs was behind it. But there was never direct evidence tying Combs to the arson. So prosecutors signaled in a letter to the judge that they would no longer proceed under the theory that Combs conspired to commit attempted arson. One of the other underlying crimes, the so-called predicate acts, involved attempted kidnapping of Capricorn Clark, a former assistant to Sean Combs. Prosecutors are no longer going to proceed under that theory either. Instead, they're emphasizing other crimes that they say Combs conspired to commit, like sex trafficking, like forced labor, and they're going to emphasize those things when they speak to the jury during summations starting on Thursday.
All right, Aaron Katersky, thank you so much for putting that into perspective for us. We really appreciate it. Again, with closing arguments and jury deliberations set to begin in the coming...
Let's go ahead and listen to the U.S. Attorney for New York.
My name is Damian Williams, and I'm the U.S.
Major developments today as we near the end of the block.
I apologize if this offends anybody, but the fat lady has sung, at least in terms of the testimony in the Diddy case, because the prosecution has rested and the defense, as we told you the other day, is not going to call a single witness. This case is going to be over as early as Friday. So the closing arguments are now set for Thursday. Presumably, it will not take more than a day, and the jury could get this case on Friday. Now, I say as early as Friday, I don't think that's going to happen, because based on everything we have heard, this is a complicated case. And I just don't see the jury all agreeing on all counts at the beginning, or even a day or two in. It feels to me, and I may be wrong, but it feels to me like there's going to be a lot of discussion and arguing, because even if they agree on two of the counts, The remaining ones, they may disagree on, and the judge is going to want some closure on everything to the extent they can do it, certainly before declaring a mistrial. So, look, I see this going into next week. The complicating factor is that next week is the 4th of July. 4th is on Friday. Now, on Thursday, court is closed, but the judge could make the jury continue to deliberate Thursday. And even though the court is closed, we could get a jury verdict on a court holiday. We don't know if that's going to happen. We don't know if the judge is going to actually do that, but we know that's an option left up to the judge. So we will see. I got to tell you something before we get into these comments, which are really interesting. The case right now is very scattered on the prosecution's part, because that's the way these cases are. You have a bunch of different witnesses talking about different things. You know, which part is RICO, which part is consent, which part is the Mann Act. This is the key when both sides try to put the case together in closing arguments. I cannot stress to you how important closing arguments are. Thursday is make or break. This is where prosecutors have to paint a picture of Diddy as a racketeer, as someone who cajoles and forces people into these freakoffs, somebody who intentionally brings sex workers from one state to another, paying them money to engage in sexual acts. This is where they have to paint that picture and paint it beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, the prosecutor, Comey, is a master at this. She did an amazing job in the Maxwell case, and I would expect she's going to be as compelling as can be on Thursday. Now, the defense has a lot of firepower. I don't know if it's going to be Tenny Garagos or Mark Agnifilo or somebody else. My sense is it's going to be Tenny Garagos who is going to deliver the defense's closing. And we know what they're going to do is they're going to focus on reasonable doubt. They're going to say, we didn't call any witnesses because the prosecution never proved its case. And they will go through a litany of things and essentially end with arguing that the prosecution is engaging in bedroom police, that this is a prosecution of bedroom police against Sean Diddy Combs. That's what they are going to argue. Now, you may have heard that the defense asked today that all the charges be dismissed, that the judge should dismiss them because the prosecution didn't prove its case. There's a lot less here than meets the eye. This is not unusual. In fact, it's standard operating procedure that the defense does this, and they do it to preserve their right on appeal. The judge almost always denies that motion. It will be denied here. This case will go to the jury. Now, yesterday, I asked people to just chime in on winners and losers. That's what we're talking about here. So who is the winner and who is the loser at this point? And I invited people to comment. There's some real interesting comments here. So let's go through a couple of them. Okay, this is Miguel Hernandez. Diddy is a freak dude, no doubt about that. But the way all of this is coming out, piece by piece, story after story, it feels less like a search for justice and more like character assassination via legal means. Okay, the next one, Stacy. I don't think the prosecution team has proven its case totally. I think some arguments were put forward, interesting, to shame Diddy. That's kind of an interesting take. Okay, that's absolutely correct that it's bedroom policing. It's not a RICO case, it's a Freako case. Next one. I would say the guy isn't guilty of RICO, nor the 2 counts of sex trafficking of Cassie and Jane. They took individual bad acts from relationships, put them together, and claimed RICO. No criminal enterprise. The next one. I mean, this is interesting. So far, 4 people are saying not guilty. What's coming out about Diddy lately is seriously disturbing. The way he manipulates people and controls the narrative while maintaining a polished public image reminds me of a book I read called Exquisite Psychopath by Johann Brones. It's not about celebrities, but it perfectly explains how some people hide calculated, harmful behavior behind charm and status. After reading it, you start seeing situations like this in a whole new light. I gotta say, this is the most interesting of all, because I think what this person is saying is what the prosecution is gonna argue in closing, that you strip the veneer off Diddy, and what you get is this character who is much darker than the person he presents himself as. And I think this is a really strong argument. Okay, another. For me, it's a slam dunk for conviction. For the kidnapping charge, he performed extortion from Cassie's mother, caught Cassie near the elevators and continued to kick her while she was unconscious. And the important part, he dragged her back into the room. For the forced labor, that's a no-brainer. For the bribery, a no-brainer. Obstruction of justice, physical violence, drug offenses, etc., all to support his ongoing illegal activities. What was illegal? Illegal drugs, helping trap the women, sex trafficking, controlling women through coercion, etc. All being set up by employees who step up, clean up, brought the drugs, helped in the bribery, etc. He didn't do it for money. He did it for power. I gotta say, these are impressive comments on both sides. That last one felt like a closing argument to me. Okay, next. I studied Homeland Security in college, and I agree with the defense that I am surprised that Homeland Security spends so much time in Puffy's bedroom and very little on terrorism that is happening in our country. Okay, I'm gonna read maybe 4 more. If I was a juror, I would have a big conversation with all the jurors and probably get everyone to see that please don't let him date your daughter. He is not a role model or a normal boyfriend to be proud of. I still have reasonable doubt on his charges and would vote on him being not guilty. He's not innocent, but the charges he's up have not been proven. Okay, couple more. Bring up Iran in his defense just tells me they have nothing and are reaching. That may be rethought, bringing that up. I agree this is a RICO case. They've already proved it's Cassie's testimony. Plus, he paid her off and still paying another policing in the bedroom about that statement. I'm not sure what that means. I would say, what about all the children that don't have fathers on their birth certificate? That's a policy that should be done, but isn't done either. Having a little trouble with that one. Okay, 2 more. I'm a woman and I would not find him guilty. This whole case seemed more like a performance for the public from day one. Humiliating and shaming him. If it were strictly a DV case, domestic violence, I would say guilty, but it's not. Is he a bad person? Yes, absolutely. Is he guilty of these charges? No. Courts are supposed to rule on laws, not morals. That's a defense argument in closing. And finally, these adults were into this kinky, toxic lifestyle. That's their business and their choice. That kind of lifestyle can turn dangerous, of course, but they all participated willingly. My body, my choice can't just be a slogan when used as a convenient method. So that's a smattering of what people are saying. And I gotta say, some of these things are the very things you're gonna hear what the lawyers on both sides are going to be saying in court on Thursday. Again, the jury could get this case Friday. We could get a verdict as early as Friday. I don't think that's going to happen. So stay tuned. And I'm also told that when a verdict comes down, the judge is not going to have a long interlude before reading it. It's going to happen quick.
Mia's testimony continued, and today we learned that the prosecution's second and final victim met with the government 27 times. Okay, 27 times. That indicates a number of issues for me. If your story is the truth, you don't need 27 meetings with prosecutors and government agents. Number 2, each time you provide a statement, your story inevitably changes. And number three, that's just more fodder for the defense to grill you on. And boy, did we witness the grilling of Mia, Combs's former assistant, who claims everything from fear and intimidation to rape, violent assaults, blackmail, forced labor, and of course, she also corroborates her friend Cassie Ventura. The defense.
What did it feel like?
It felt like Diddy's team was saying, y'all got us effed up, and y'all did our job for us, and we ain't got to do nothing else. Y'all brought this man here. Y'all wasted his time, his family's time, his energy. Now we about to let him walk out of this courtroom. Thank you for doing our job. Good night.
Well, the reality is that's the confidence his lawyer is supposed to have.
Man, but I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've never thought that he was going to walk clean away from this, but I didn't think that they would come with that confidence at the end of this.
They would have to. I'd be mad as hell if I'm paying them all this money and they ain't have no confidence.
I mean, but even presenting, like when they stood up to present their defense, they entered in, some transcripts from witness testimony from like Dawn, from Jane, from Mia, all these different people of like the times that they basically were caught up on the stand and inconsistent. And they showed text message from Cassie saying she's so in love with Diddy. Like, that was it. Like, I thought that there was at least going to be more on that side of, like, let us put this narrative in the juror's mind, because that's in front of the jury. They ain't really do much on that side either.
None of us really know what's going to happen, but no outcome would surprise me except one, and that's guilty on all counts. Guilty on all counts would be a surprise.
I can't see that either. Yeah, I don't think
that would be a surprise. But, we keep talking about the RICO. I thought racketeering, you only have to prove at least 2 predicates.
I'm not an attorney, but the way that this woman broke it down yesterday, her main point about all of the charges that they're throwing at him is that there are multiple different elements that you have to satisfy, and that if one is not satisfied out of the many, there's room for them to come in and say, you didn't do your job here, he shouldn't have to be looking at this charge.
But he got 3 charges, right? So transportation to engage in prostitution.
Yes.
I think they proved that. Sex trafficking for force, fraud, or coercion. I'm not sure about that one. Racketeering, like I said, you only got to prove 2 predicates. The bribery and the kidnapping, that looked pretty strong. But I just don't know if there will be a unanimous jury verdict on any of these things, because the general consensus from people is that Diddy is just a 5-star freak.
Basically.
And what's the schedule now? When is the ending, the closing remarks, and when did the jurors start deliberating? Do we know?
Yeah, so today, Wednesday, is going to be that charging conversation, so we'll know exactly what the charges will be for the jury. Thursday is when the closing remarks will happen, so that'll be between the defense and the prosecution. That might go until Friday. They set Thursday and Friday 9 to 5 p.m. for that to happen. And then after that, the jury deliberation starts. So if that closes early, the closing remarks, the jury can start deliberating by Friday. But more than likely, the jury will begin deliberating Monday.
Well, don't come back with a verdict until after the 4th of July. Let us enjoy our vacation and stuff next week. And then when everybody get back to work, come back with the razzle dazzle.
It's going to be before that. It's going to be before that. Didn't the judge say he wanted the decision before 4th of July? And Diddy will probably be having a 4th of July party if
you want to party so damn
you
bad.
want to be booked.
You keep talking about this. You want to be a party favorite at a Diddy party so bad.
The judge has to give the jury the time that they need. So even though he's been saying it would be nice for all of us to get out of here before the holiday, if they need more time, that's just what will have to happen.
I apologize if this offends anybody, but the fat lady has sung, at least in terms of the testimony in the Diddy case, because the prosecution has rested and the defense, as we told you the other day, is
With you now with some breaking celebrity dish news. Prosecutors have dropped some charges against Diddy. Joining us now is TMZ executive producer Harvey Levin with the latest late-breaking details. I mean, Harvey, I can't get through your story here fast enough. What's the latest?
Okay, it's a little bit confusing, Marissa, but let me explain. The prosecution sent a letter to the judge saying the judge had asked prosecutors and defense to streamline the proposed jury instructions. The prosecution is saying, okay, so let's eliminate attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. So now the question, what does that mean? We know the arson relates to Diddy allegedly blowing up Kid Cudi's car in a fit of jealousy, the fact that Kid Cudi had dated Cassie. So it would seem that they're saying we're just not going to pursue that when it comes to giving the jury instructions, because the jury never directly tied Diddy to the actual arson of the car. Now, they do mention the word attempted, so I suppose you can make the argument that they're going to not say he attempted it, he actually did it. But that doesn't make sense, because all they said in the testimony was that they believe he did it. And it went on fire, so it was done. So it seems like they're eliminating that. And similarly, when it comes to kidnapping, you may remember that there was testimony by Capricorn Clark, Diddy's assistant, saying that Diddy suspected her of stealing jewelry. They took her, put her in a warehouse, and gave her lie detector tests, and putting her in that warehouse was kidnapping. It seems they're not going to pursue that. And there was a second one involving this alleged victim, Jane. So it seems they're taking certain things off the table, but I got to be honest with you, the letter's a little bit confusing, but it definitely seems the prosecution is pulling back on what they are going to argue to the jury in closing argument.
Absolutely. And when it comes to the aiding and abetting with the sex trafficking, that charge is still there, but they're pulling back on even some of those details.
And my guess is what they're pulling back on are things like Diddy's assistant booking a hotel room. I mean, that's booking a hotel room. Travago is not sex trafficking. and just booking a hotel room is not really evidence of sex trafficking. So I'm guessing it's things like that they might be pulling back on.
It definitely appears as if the prosecution have found some weak spots in their case, potentially, and that's why they're giving the jury those instructions, before making their closing arguments. Thank you so much, Harvey. I know this was breaking news that you all have provided us with, and we'll certainly stay in the know as we continue to cover the outcome of this case. Just a reminder, you can catch Harvey and the entire TMZ.
Let's go ahead and listen to the U.S. Attorney. Let's go ahead and listen to the U.S. Attorney for New York.
My name is Damian Williams, and I'm the U.S. Attorney here in the Southern District of New York. Today, I'm announcing the unsealing of a 3-count indictment charging Sean Combs with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, interstate transportation for prostitution. The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. As alleged in the indictment, to carry out this conduct, Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity, including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice. Let me say a little bit more about the charges. The indictment alleges that Combs abused and exploited women and other people for years, and in a variety of ways. As alleged, Combs used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sexual performances with male commercial sex workers, some of whom he transported or caused to be transported over state lines. Combs allegedly planned and controlled the sex performances, which he called freakoffs, and he often electronically recorded them. The freakoffs sometimes lasted days at a time, involved multiple commercial sex workers, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB, which Combs distributed to the victims to keep them obedient and compliant. As alleged, when Combs didn't get his way, he was violent, and he subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freakoffs, and that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. On one occasion in March of 2016, that conduct was captured on video and later reported in the media. Specifically, Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a victim in a Los Angeles hotel when the victim was attempting to flee. As alleged, these assaults often resulted in injuries to the victims, which took days or weeks to heal. In addition to the violence, The indictment alleges that Combs threatened and coerced victims to get them to participate in the Freakoffs. He used the embarrassing and sensitive recordings he made of the Freakoffs as collateral against the victims. And the indictment alleges that he maintained control over the victims in several ways, including by giving them drugs, by giving and threatening to take away financial support or housing, by promising them career opportunities, by monitoring their whereabouts, and even by dictating their physical appearance. Because of all of this, the indictment alleges that the victims did not believe they could refuse Combs without risking their security or facing more abuse. The indictment also alleges other acts of violence undertaken by Combs and others, including violence against witnesses to his abuse, kidnapping, and arson. The indictment alleges that on more than one occasion, Combs carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten victims and witnesses. Now, Combs did not do this all on his own. As I mentioned, Combs has been charged with RICO conspiracy. He used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way. Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff. The indictment alleges that those individuals facilitated the Freakoffs. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with the supplies, including drugs, baby oil, personal lubricant, extra linens, and lighting. When the hotel rooms got damaged, they helped clean it up. They arranged for victims and commercial sex workers to travel for the Freakoffs, and they delivered large quantities of cash to Combs to pay for the commercial sex workers. The indictment also alleges that they helped Combs cover up his crimes. During the March 2016 incident at the LA hotel that I mentioned earlier, a member of the hotel security staff intervened, and Combs attempted to bribe the staff member with a stack of cash to make sure that what happened was kept quiet. And as the indictment alleges, in late 2023, after public allegations were made about Combs' crimes, he and others pressured witnesses and victims to stay silent, including by making phone calls to witnesses and victims and giving them a false narrative of what they had experienced. And as alleged, Combs used others to help conceal his abuse by monitoring and preventing victims from leaving a location in order to hide their injuries, or by locating and contacting a victim who had attempted to flee. As part of this investigation, in March of this year, special agents from HSI executed search warrants at Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles. They also executed a warrant for Combs' electronic devices. During those searches, agents seized evidence of the crimes charged in this indictment. They seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 defaced AR-15s and a large capacity drum magazine. They also seized evidence of the Freakoffs, electronic devices that contain images and videos of the Freakoffs with multiple victims. And they seized cases and cases of the kinds of personal lubricant and baby oil that Combs' staff allegedly used to stock hotel rooms for the Freakoffs, more than 1,000 bottles altogether. Here are some of the items that we recovered during the searches. As you can see here, this is a drum magazine, large capacity, and it contains, I believe, 59 rounds. I mentioned as well, we recovered 3 AR-15s. This is a close-up shot of one of the AR-15s, and you can see right here, the serial number has been thoroughly defaced. Another picture of more ammunition and parts of 2 AR-15s right there. Now, I want to be clear about 2 things. First, this office is determined to investigate and prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be. No one should doubt our commitment on that. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York. Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly. Anyone with information can call 1-877-4HSI-TIP. I want to express my deep appreciation for the victims and witnesses who have used their voices and helped bring this criminal conduct to light. We would not be here without them. I also want to thank the dedicated case agents on the HSI Trafficking in Person Squad in New York. They have been with us since day one and have worked tirelessly on this investigation. They will continue to be invaluable partners to us. I also want to thank the incredible agents and analysts from SDNY who have also provided tremendous assistance on this case. I'm deeply grateful for their continued work. And finally, I want to thank the outstanding career prosecutors from SDNY who are handling this case. Meredith Foster, Emily Johnson, Chrissy Slavic, Madison Smizer, and Mitzi Steiner, and their supervisors, Jamie Backleeper and Jacqueline Kelly. They are members of the Civil Rights Unit in our criminal division. We created the Civil Rights Unit when I became U.S. Attorney. I'm deeply proud of their work on this and so many other cases. I'll now take some questions.
Aaron Katursky, ABC.
Thanks, Nick. Damian, thanks. The indictment describes aggressive, open, violent, hedonistic abuse that you say was recurrent and widely known. Why did it take law enforcement so long to intervene? How many women were victimized by Sean Combs and how many others were involved?
Look, our investigation is ongoing. We are committed to bringing justice to everyone who's been victimized by the defendant. I can't tell you why it took so long. I think the better focus is on the fact that we are here today. And we are committed to making sure that justice is done. Next question.
Thank you. Julia Ainsley, NBC.
Thank you for doing this. You said we are not done and that Combs did not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking anything off the table.
Janet Fisher, Newsday.
What's the difference between the sex trafficking and promoting travel for the purpose of prostitution?
Well, there are different crimes with different elements. I don't think we should get into the nitty-gritty of the legal discussion right now, but the sex trafficking, we believe, they're all serious offenses, but the sex trafficking conduct carries some significant penalties, and we are gratified that we were able to bring that charge.
Is one more coercive than the other?
I'm not going to be able to get into that, but you can look it up, and yes, sex trafficking, especially when it involves coercion or force, is a very serious crime, and it carries significant penalties.
Good afternoon, Darla Miles, ABC 7 New York. Thank you for this press conference and for the details. Two questions. In context of this indictment and the information that was presented to the grand jury, are you able to clarify the number of victims? It's mentioned plural in the indictment, but can you specify the number of victims just for this particular indictment? And secondly, can you provide details about the alleged arson?
Unfortunately, I'm not able to provide either. The number of victims, you are correct. We are intentional in saying multiple. The details of the arson incident are limited to what we have in the indictment and also the detention letter that we filed, which contains more details than the indictment does at various points, but we don't have anything more beyond that. Next question.
Lynn Tran, CNN.
Are any of his accomplices or associates under investigation? And additionally, could he face any more charges?
So the investigation is ongoing. That means both as to him and to anyone else who we believe committed the crime with him. Next question.
Juliette Papa.
Hi, good morning from 1010 Wins. Any indication that some of the women or victims here were imprisoned in his residences, and did he have locations where he kept them, and they were not allowed to leave? And also, he's indicted here, although there were searches and raids in LA, Miami. Why in New York?
Well, I'm biased. I'm the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. I think that we have an outstanding track record of bringing some of the most impactful, sprawling, complex, difficult sex trafficking, human trafficking, labor trafficking, you name it, the Southern District of New York can do it, and so we're very proud of that. And so the scope and complexity of this investigation isn't something that we ran from, it's something that we embrace, and we will continue to do that. As to your question about whether he imprisoned anyone, all I can say is that, I mentioned this March 2016 incident where something was caught on video where a victim was attempting to flee, and there was violence that was associated with it.
Was that at the residence or a hotel?
That was at a hotel.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. Sure.
Thanks a lot. Does your office intend to seek remand, or are you reaching a bail package? And if you're willing, how would you contrast this with the R. Kelly case in EDNY in terms of the elements? Thanks.
So we will be seeking detention. We have filed a letter laying out our reasoning for seeking pretrial detention. I'm not going to be able to expand beyond what's in the letter, but it contains all of the reasoning, and it contains the law as well. There is a presumption of detention in a case like this, and we think that's warranted.
John Anise, New York Daily News.
Thank you. I was hoping to get some more detail about the searches of his residence, the guns, the cases of lubricant, and the videos. Where were they found amongst his residence? Were they all scattered around the houses in one place? I kind of wanted to just get a better picture of how that stuff was found.
Well, look, I think that some of the details that you're seeking are in the detention letter. So, for instance, some of the AR-15s, 2 of the 3 defaced AR-15s were found in his bedroom closet in Miami, broken down into parts along with magazines, with ammunition loaded in them. So some of that detail is in the detention letter. Beyond that, I'm not going to be able to get into where other items were stored.
Ben Kochman, Post.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Your office was the office that had been prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein before he died in custody. I have not read your detention memo yet. It's the first thing I'm going to do after this ends. But does the memo address, or is your office concerned with Combs's safety in custody, given what happened with Epstein?
So we are concerned with anyone's safety whenever they are detained prior to trial. It's part of our obligations to keep people safe as well. It's part of the criminal justice system. So, but I do not draw any sort of connection between Jeffrey Epstein's suicide and what may or may not happen to any other defendant while they are detained pre-trial. And of course, the decision whether to detain the defendant will be up to a judge. Our position is that pretrial detention is warranted under the law and based on the facts of this case, and I'll leave it at that.
Are some of the prosecutors on this case some of the same prosecutors that had been handling that, or that worked on the Maxwell case?
So I'm not going to get into the staffing. I will say that this team, this group of AUSAs, this incredible group has been working on this case around the clock, and they've had their hands full. Next question.
Gus Rosendale, NBC News.
Good morning, sir. Combs' attorney said that his client has been cooperative with investigators. He said that this morning. I was wondering if you would have a reaction to that.
Let me just say this. I think that generally and with increasing frequency, the word cooperative or cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity and no longer really bears any relation to what the word means when we use it in a very specific context. So responding to lawful process and the like does not qualify as cooperation when we use that term here.
Mike Sisak, AP.
Thanks. To that end, was there any discussion of Mr. Combs surrendering? I understand he was taken into custody at a hotel in Manhattan last night, and maybe that wasn't the plan. Can you elaborate on how that came about and why that was?
I'm not going to be able to get into any sort of operational details as to how he was taken into custody and when. He is in custody right now. He will be appearing in court later today.
Was there any discussion of him surrendering, given they claim he's cooperating?
I'm not going to be able to get into law enforcement tactics or operations. Well, I can't get into the charging decision. It is very meaningful to us that weapons were possessed, as we allege in the indictment. Part of the reason why this conduct was so pervasive and harmful was because victims and others didn't necessarily feel comfortable denying him his wishes, as we allege, because of the presence of firearms. I should leave it there.
Thanks. Last question, Jacob Shamison.
Jacob Shamsian, Business Insider. Thank you. Given that he's the sole defendant in this case and that you allege he's part of a conspiracy that involves members of his companies, do you anticipate a superseding indictment that bring allegations against other members of his companies or other co-conspirators as well?
I can't take anything off the table. Anything is possible. Our investigation is very active and ongoing. And I think a lot of you who cover this office know that when we say such things, that developments are certainly foreseeable, but I cannot predict them sitting here today. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We have been listening to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York detail some very disturbing and graphic allegations in a newly unsealed indictment, a federal indictment against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. That was Damian Williams. And I want to go ahead and bring in CBS News correspondent Jerika Duncan, who is outside the courthouse. Jerika, what are we learning from this indictment that we didn't already know from many of the civil cases that have been brought against Combs? I understand the difference between civil and criminal. This being criminal. But what revelations have there been in this indictment?
Well, there's so much to discuss, for the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District, Damian Williams, to take as many questions as he did and really lay out what he could with this case gives us a better picture into what evidence they also say they have to make these charges. Again, if you're just tuning in, those charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, and transport.
With you now with some breaking celebrity dish news. Prosecutors have dropped some charges against Diddy. Joining us now is TMZ executive producer Harvey Levin with the latest late breaking details. Harvey, I can't get through your story here fast enough. What's the latest?
Okay, it's a little bit confusing, Marissa, but let me explain. The prosecution sent a letter to the judge saying the judge had asked prosecutors and defense to streamline the proposed jury instructions. The prosecution is saying, okay, so let's eliminate attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. So now the question, what does that mean? We know the arson relates to Diddy allegedly blowing up Kid Cudi's car in a fit of jealousy, the fact that Kid Cudi had dated Cassie. So it would seem that they're saying we're just not going to pursue that when it comes to giving the jury instructions because the jury never directly tied Diddy to the actual arson of the car. Now, they do mention the word attempted, so I suppose you can make the argument that they're going to not say he attempted it, he actually did it. But that doesn't make sense because all they said in the testimony was that they believe he did it. Mm-hmm. And it went on fire, so it was done. So it seems like they're eliminating that. And similarly, when it comes to kidnapping, you may remember that there was testimony by Capricorn Clark, Diddy's assistant, saying that Diddy suspected her of stealing jewelry. They took her, put her in a warehouse, and gave her lie detector tests, and putting her in that warehouse was kidnapping. It seems they're not going to pursue that. And there was a second one involving this alleged victim, Jane. So it seems they're taking certain things off the table, but I got to be honest with you, the letter's a little bit confusing, but it definitely seems the prosecution is pulling back on what they are going to argue to the jury in closing argument.
Absolutely. And when it comes to the aiding and abetting with the sex trafficking, that charge is still there, but they're pulling back on even some of those details.
And my guess is what they're pulling back on are things like Diddy's assistant booking a hotel room. I mean, How is, that's booking a hotel room. Trivago is not sex trafficking. and just booking a hotel room is not really evidence of sex trafficking. So I'm guessing it's things like that they might be pulling back on.
It definitely appears as if the prosecution have found some weak spots in their case, potentially, and that's why they're giving the jury those instructions, before making their closing arguments. Thank you so much, Harvey. I know this was breaking news that you all have provided us with, and we'll certainly stay in the know as we continue to cover the outcome of this case.
Once just stories, then there were witness statements. But now what's entering evidence is more than testimony. This is the case, Sean Diddy Combs. I'm David Ushery. We're hearing the recordings, we're reading the texts, and Sean Combs is feeling the weight of what was never meant to be public. This trial racing to the finish, where 12 jurors will decide what they believe is justice.
Now to the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial, and today a judge dismissed a juror in the case claiming they provided inconsistent information.
A shakeup in the jury on day 24 of Sean Combs' federal sex trafficking trial. The judge announcing that juror 6, a 41-year-old black man, was not truthful about his residence. He told the court that he lived in the Bronx when he actually resides in New Jersey. He was dismissed and replaced with a 57-year-old accountant from Westchester County. Meanwhile, concerns have also emerged with another male juror who allegedly discussed the case with a colleague. Now, in its 6th week, the trial has shifted to examining key evidence. Exhibit staffers from the U.S. Attorney's Office believe will help the jury navigate the sea of evidence. In one exchange between Cassie Ventura and a male escort, it reads, "I also know the rules, dress casual and bring baby oil." Cassie responded, "Casual, yes. No oil, smiley face." Or when one of Combs' security guards supposedly texted about paying for drugs, saying $4,800 for trees should be enough for 4 weeks. The prosecutor showed flight records, hotel information, text messages, and graphic videos. When those videos played, the court turned off all the public screens and gave the jury headphones to watch several Freakoff clips.
More courtroom drama today involving jurors in Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking trial. The judge gave them a stern warning for violating court orders.
More jury issues. The judge accused somebody associated with this case of lying. After that happened, that is when the jury watched more of those Freakoff videos. The jurors were shown 18 minutes of disturbing videos filmed and directed by Sean Combs, allegedly depicting Cassie Ventura with male escorts. The content so graphic that some jurors looked away. Prosecutors say the video is evidence of sex trafficking. Combs' defense say that it reflects his private sex life involving consenting adults. A separate but significant video, the infamous hotel fight between Combs and Cassie, wasn't played in court, but the events surrounding it were discussed in detail. A special agent took the stand, walking the jurors through a timeline that included every text message, photo, phone call associated with it. Also today, another issue with the jury, a leak. The judge exclaiming, "This case should be tried in court, not in the media." The judge upset with a news article that described an issue with juror number 7 that was supposed to be sealed. Now the judge says that the attorneys, defense, and prosecution could face civil or criminal penalties.
Court was canceled for the day in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial because a juror got sick. The prosecution was expected to rest its case by the end of this week, with the jury getting the case perhaps as early as next week. But now court isn't scheduled to resume until Friday. We're also learning Combs is not expected to testify. That's according to People magazine.
The jury in Sean Diddy Combs' criminal trial had a short day today. They were dismissed at 1 this afternoon, but not before hearing some salacious testimony from one of Combs' former assistants.
We're learning that closing arguments could happen next week, and the government's final witnesses took the stand, including a man who used to be Sean Combs' assistant. He got immunity to testify. Brendan Paul, a one-time Division I basketball player, he said that he worked 8,100 hours a week, catering to all of Sean Combs' needs, like scheduling workouts, consulting on meals, buying drugs, and setting up and cleaning up freak-offs or wild king nights. A prosecutor asked Paul about the day in March of 2024 when the Fed stopped Combs from taking off on an international flight. And Paul got detained for having cocaine, the drugs Combs's. The government's now saying it could rest on Monday. The defense thinks it could be done by Wednesday. That is why the judge said today that closing arguments could happen on Thursday.
One side says the parties and the passion were about love. One side says they were about survival. Erica Byfield, our eyes and ears at the court, as you just reported. We're in the final days now, Erica, so we've asked you now to dip into some of the evidence that's been presented and also into your notebook now to show us how each side is trying to illustrate their case.
Yeah, this is kind of important because I think what everybody needs to know is when somebody's on the stand, you can only present what you know, right? It doesn't come in chronological order. So let's walk through what they now know happened in what exact order versus one person saying this happened to me.
I see. So we begin with a text, no more hotel text.
Yes, let's see a text that Jane, one of the people who is accusing Sean Combs of sex trafficking, this is what she sent to KK. Do you want to read a part of this?
Yeah, also just trying to keep it real with you. I'm not doing any more hard partying. We recently got into a pretty big fight, and I'm putting my foot down about it. No more hotel nights and all of that stuff. Why is this important and the timing of this important?
Yes, because this came out on November 2nd of 2023.
Okay.
And then we find out this came out before Cassie's lawsuit was filed.
Which put this in the public realm. All right.
Exactly. So this was behind closed doors. We had no idea that she was saying this, at least internally within KK and potentially to Sean Combs.
And real quickly, people have heard this term KK, kind of elusive, not someone we expect to testify, but was a key lieutenant for Sean Combs, right?
Exactly. That's probably the best way to describe her. She was someone very close to Sean Combs. She handled everything essentially for him with business and in life.
All right.
So then we find out again that this lawsuit from Cassie Ventura is filed 14 days after Jane sent that text.
Okay.
And then let's see this. And then we find out just 3 days after Cassie files this lawsuit, there are some secret recordings that Sean Combs took of Jane. On the 19th, you see, just days later. Let's read a portion of these because here, Jane testified she had no idea that Sean Combs was recording her.
Okay, I know I called, I reached out. I mean, I called you and reached out to you. You know what I'm saying. I needed you. I'm sorry that you're feeling this way. I swear to like you. I know what I'm saying. Love was definitely love, definitely true. Jane, a simple down here.
Yes, and then he says to her in one portion, David, I just think that this was some kind of kinky, we're gonna leave that word out, that we both liked.
Okay.
And Jane then responded, to that. She didn't give a response, really.
A second recording.
There's a second recording 20 minutes later that the jury got to listen to. And again, when the jury's listening to them, they're listening to the whole entire call. We're just showing you a portion of the transcript.
Okay. But I'm just saying, like, I need your friendship right now, baby. I'm calling you back just to make sure you're breathing. I gotta go. I feel unintelligible. I can't even like you, you know? And she says, I can't talk. What were they demonstrating here?
He's saying again multiple times throughout this call that he needs her friendship. And again, this is 20 minutes after that first one. Every single time Jane tries to say something, he cuts her off. Here she says something like she was feeling twisted about what they were doing. But again, this is how the jury's now seeing the exact timeline. How Jane texted KK, the lawsuit comes out, then the 2 secret recordings. And then something else. There's December of the same year where Jane sends a text message specifically to Sean Combs. Let's look at that.
All right. Make sure Robin is not doing anything dumb.
Oh, I got ahead of myself.
You got ahead of yourself, like not having that rent paid on top. This is a rent.
Yes,
okay.
Because Sean Combs regularly would threaten Jane with her rent if she did not engage in these sex acts, according to Jane.
That was a big part of her testimony, okay. And there was a text about exploitation, is that right?
Yes, and that's the one we want to get to from December of this year. So let's go to that one. You can see this is what Jane told Sean Combs.
Okay. Jane says, you are the only opportunist here. You exploited the blank out of me. You win 3 years of being used, and you had 3 years of fun with my body. You broke me. Our situation has never, ever been fair to me. You asked me what I needed to move on, and now you're upset. This is a text from Jane to Combs.
Yep, Jane to Combs, December of 2023. So now the jury, you can see the exact timeline of everything that's coming in, which is pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, well, it is. It's interesting in how the defense is trying to counter that. Now, there are also the setting up of the so-called freak-offs and testimony related to that.
So much about these freak-offs. Now we're seeing, both ladies have testified that there was some kind of pattern. We're kind of seeing how that pattern came together. All of these exchanges that the jury has seen started with text messages.
So Jules is one of the
Jules
hired adult performers.
Yes. performers. And then in this case, they saw a text message string between Jules and Sean Combs, and then Sean Combs is making sure he's ready to go. You see, he says, "Call me when you can."
Okay. Then the actual arrangements, which is key, I guess, to part of the prosecution's argument.
Yes.
Text on
The
that in terms of
second thing-
details.
Yes, the second thing we would see is flights being booked. And this is an email that Sean Combs sent one of his employees. Want to read that?
Hey, I need a flight booked for Friday, 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. from LA to New York City. Regular room in London Hotel under Jules Theodore. ASAP. Let me know when it's done, please.
Exactly. So we saw that email that Sean Combs sent her. And then you can see, when you open up my notebook, you can see exactly this email that he had sent to her. And then we can see her response. I circled her response in orange. You can see down here at the bottom. So she sends him back this information, just kind of feels like moments later. She says, the flight's booked. Here's the flight information for Jules from LA to New York, the hotel information, the London Hotel, just like he requested, here on West 54th Street in New York. And then she tells him the dates, December 11th through December 14th. And what's key about this is we found out earlier, if we open up the page even more, we find out earlier that that matches up with the flight records that were requested. And so you can see, here's the full page,
And
right?
a car service, right?
The car service to pick him up from the airport when he landed, the flights that match up, and everything. The other thing I forgot to point out is that on the next page, we got to see Cassie's flight arrangement so that they got her to the exact location where she needed to be. And then the bottom thing that I highlighted there, that is something that the defense brought up, because they were saying, oh, maybe these things didn't happen. And it's going to be for the jury to decide, but they now know there were text messages, flight records.
And the prosecution asserting business managers who worked for the company made the arrangements. At least that's the allegation.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, we understand also the jury watched part of the Freakoffs in videos.
They did.
Tell us about this.
So that happened during the latter half of week 6. And this was kind of a significant moment because we were waiting to see, just like everybody else, when would they see these? The prosecution showed them about 3 minutes worth. The defense, as we mentioned earlier, showed them about 18 minutes worth. They call each of these things BX, and then it's a number associated with it. So when you go through my notes now, you're gonna look for all these little small circles. That's when I was marking those. The jury is watching, and you'll see eventually that they don't, they can see what's happening. Sean Combs couldn't even see what's happening, but he does have on headphones so he can listen.
Yeah, I think we have a sketch of that to kind of give us a sense here that this is what the jurors are seeing, but he cannot see. Is that correct?
No, but he can listen.
He can listen.
If you're sitting in the gallery, kind of like where you are, you can actually peek over Sean Combs' shoulder and see the screens. So to make sure that didn't happen, they did not put the videos on those screens, and then the jurors were watching them.
The defense tried to come back with some texts or sexy texts. Or what did the defense try to do?
They did. They definitely did come back with that. Before we get to that, 1 second, there's just 5 videos that the defense showed the jurors, and that was kind of significant. I do want to point out one more thing, actually, before we move on, how Sean Combs was reacting, because I decided to look over at him, right? What is he doing? He was tapping his fingers on his leg. I saw him looking at the jury, and then, as you mentioned earlier, one of the jurors actually removed her headphones. So
could not keep looking at it.
Yeah, we don't know what she was thinking.
Okay, so now, before I got ahead of you, the defense response was what?
Yeah, the defense went ahead because all of those videos allegedly showed Cassie Ventura in that situation with a male escort and Sean Combs directing. So the defense then went ahead to show that at least after one of those videos, this is what Cassie Ventura texted Sean Combs.
Keep having sexy flashbacks of you yesterday. Well, you must be busy or asleep. Talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, so the defense is questioning why would she send that if this was something that she didn't want to do.
And the similar message as well.
Yep, there's another one that came out. So you see Miss Garagos, that's one of Sean Combs' attorneys.
Yeah, saying, I promise I'll be the nastiest freak blank in the world to make up for it. That is representing what now?
Because Cassie had to put on a certain outfit and a certain look for these things, and she's promising that she'll do that the next time they meet up.
Okay, all right. A lot to get to. Thank you. We'll see you in a few minutes because there's more to talk about. There was a time when Sean Diddy Combs could go anywhere, take a jet, a yacht, walk into any VIP room. Now, his future could be in a prison cell. He's facing 5 serious criminal counts. We'll take a closer look at them. Sex, drugs, money, power. Those were the themes of the empire. They were the heart of his music, and now they're at the center of the charges against Sean Diddy Combs. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins us to break down the charges. Veteran trial lawyer, been very busy with a lot of high-profile cases. But Danny, we figured in these final days, this would be a good time, again, for viewers and listeners to go through each charge.